$106 billion. That's how much wealth changed hands when the Soviet Union collapsed. Not over decades, in months. Factories, oil fields, entire industries transferred from the state to private hands almost overnight. And here's what should fascinate you. The people who captured that wealth weren't the old communist elite. They were nobodies, engineers, youth group leaders, guys running photocopier side hustles. One man, Artyom Tarasov, went from making a standard Soviet salary to becoming the USSR's first official millionaire in under 3 years. Not through connections, through pattern recognition. Because here's what nobody teaches you about empire collapse. While the headlines focus on chaos and destruction, a very specific type of person gets rich, every single time, for 500 years. Same archetypes, same strategies, same outcome. The Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the British Empire, the Soviet Union. When these giants fell, ordinary people, not the elites, built fortunes that lasted generations. And they did it by filling 5 specific roles that emerge every time a system breaks down. If you're watching the cracks forming in today's system, the debt, the inflation, the institutional decay, you need to understand these 5 archetypes. Because the playbook that worked in 1453, in 1923, and in 1991 works today. The question is whether you'll recognize the opportunity or become a casualty of it. Let me show you the 5 types of ordinary people who thrive when empires decline, and exactly how they do it. The first archetype is the middleman, and understanding this role might be the most important thing you learn today. When empires collapse, they don't vanish instantly. They fragment. The old systems still exist, barely functioning, while new systems emerge. And in that gap, that chaos between what was and what's coming, middlemen make fortunes. Here's how it works. Hong Kong, 1880s. The Qing dynasty is crumbling. Western powers are carving up China. British merchants want access to Chinese markets. Chinese suppliers want access to British money. But there's a problem. Different languages, different customs, different currencies, complete mutual distrust. Enter Robert Hotung. Hotung was born to a mixed Chinese-European family. Nobody special. Started as a low-level clerk making next to nothing. But he had one advantage. He spoke both languages. He understood both cultures. He could bridge 2 worlds that couldn't communicate with each other. He became what the British called a compradore, essentially a trade intermediary. He'd connect British merchants with Chinese suppliers, take a cut of every transaction. By age 35, Robert Hotung was the richest man in Hong Kong, not because he produced anything, not because he had capital, because he stood between 2 systems and made himself indispensable. Now fast forward exactly 100 years, Moscow, 1987. Artyom Tarasov is an engineer watching the Soviet system crack. Gorbachev has just legalized limited private enterprise. Most people are confused, scared, clinging to the old ways. Tarasov sees opportunity. He notices something remarkable. The Soviet economy has massive stockpiles of scrap metal, worthless domestically, but in the West, valuable. Meanwhile, Soviet citizens are desperate for Western electronics, VCRs, computers, things they can't get. Tarasov becomes the bridge. He exports scrap metal for hard currency, uses that currency to import Western electronics, sells them domestically at massive markups. Within 2 years, he publicly declares earnings of 3 million rubles, becoming the USSR's first acknowledged millionaire. Same strategy as Hotung, different century, different empire, identical pattern. The middleman doesn't create new value. He connects existing value across system boundaries. When old supply chains break, when old relationships fracture, when old trust networks collapse, the person who can bridge the gap captures enormous wealth. Here's what this means for you today. If you see systems fragmenting, maybe traditional retail dying while e-commerce grows, maybe legacy finance struggling while crypto emerges, maybe domestic manufacturing returning while global supply chains fracture, the opportunity is in the gap. The person who can translate between old and new, who can move value across boundaries others can't cross, who can connect buyers and sellers that don't know how to find each other, that person is positioned for the same kind of wealth Hotung and Tarasov captured. It's not about being the smartest or having the most capital. It's about being the bridge. The second archetype is the necessity provider, and this might be the most reliable path to wealth during instability. Here's the fundamental truth about collapsing systems. People still need to eat. They still need fuel. They still need their tools repaired, their homes heated, their basic needs met. And when large institutions fail to provide these things, individuals who step up become indispensable. Kenya, 1950s. The British Empire is losing its grip. The Mau Mau uprising is creating chaos. Supply chains are disrupted. The colonial economy is fracturing, and Nyenga Karume is a young man from a poor family with zero connections and zero capital. But he notices something. People still need charcoal. It's the primary cooking fuel. Without it, families can't prepare food. So Karumi starts selling charcoal, door to door, nothing glamorous, just showing up reliably with something people desperately need. He saves his earnings, expands into timber, opens a small shop. After independence, he diversifies into beer distribution, another essential, then hotels, then real estate. By the time he died, Njenga Karumi was worth an estimated $200 million. From charcoal seller to multimillionaire. Not through speculation, not through political connections, at least not initially. Through the simple, brutal logic of providing what people cannot live without. Now let me show you the same pattern in post-war Germany. 1945. The country is literally rubble, cities destroyed, currency worthless, millions displaced. The economic system has completely collapsed. Karl and Theo Albrecht return from the war to find their mother's small grocery store barely standing. Most businesses have failed. Supply chains are non-existent. Germans are starving. The brothers make a decision that seems obvious in hindsight, but required real clarity at the time. They will sell basic food at the lowest possible prices. No frills, no extras, just essentials, as cheap as possible. They applied extreme efficiency, stripped out every unnecessary cost, focused exclusively on high turnover staples. By 1950, just 5 years after the war, they had 13 stores. By 1961, over 300. You know them today as Aldi, one of the largest grocery chains on earth. The Albrechts didn't invent anything. They didn't have special technology or unique insights. They recognized that in chaos, basics become premium. They provided necessities when the system couldn't, and they became billionaires. Here's another example that shows how this scales across different economies. Turkey, 1920s. The Ottoman Empire has just collapsed. The new Turkish Republic is emerging from years of war. The economy is devastated, but people still need clothes. They still need cooking oil, basic consumer goods. Haja Omar Sabancı was the son of a poor farmer. When his father died, young Sabancı walked 450 kilometers, that's nearly 300 miles, to find work in the cotton fields. He labored for years, saved everything, eventually bought a small cotton gin. From that single piece of equipment, a machine that processed a basic necessity, he built what became Sabancı Holdings, one of Turkey's largest conglomerates. Cotton textiles, vegetable oil, eventually banking and industry, all starting from the simple insight that people need basic goods, and someone has to provide them. The necessity provider strategy is this. Identify what people will cut last from their budget: food, fuel, basic repairs, healthcare, cheap transportation. Position yourself there, be reliable, be affordable, scale. It's not glamorous. Nobody writes exciting articles about charcoal sellers or discount grocers. But when systems collapse, the people providing basics don't just survive, they accumulate. The third archetype is the adapter. And this one requires something most people struggle with, the willingness to completely reinvent yourself. When empires fall, yesterday's credentials become worthless. The skills that made you successful under the old regime become irrelevant, or worse, liabilities. The people who thrive are those who can pivot fast, learn new rules, and align with emerging power structures while others cling to the past. China, 1895. The Qing dynasty has just lost the First Sino-Japanese War, a humiliating defeat that exposed the empire's weakness. The old order is crumbling. Anyone paying attention can see massive change coming. Zhang Jian had just achieved the highest honor possible in imperial China, first place in the National Civil Service examinations. He was set for life. Guaranteed position, prestige, security, everything the old system could offer, and he walked away from it. Zhang recognized that the future wasn't in imperial bureaucracy. It was in industry, in modernization, in capitalism. So this scholar official taught himself business. He raised capital. In 1895, he founded the Dasheng Cotton Mill, one of China's first major modern factories. When the Qing dynasty finally collapsed in 1911, Zhang transitioned smoothly into the new republic. He became an economic advisor, a government minister, all while running his business empire. The officials who stayed loyal to the old system, they lost everything. Zhang Jian thrived because he adapted before he had to. Now let me show you the extreme version of this pattern. Moscow, 1980s. Mikhail Khodorkovsky is a rising star in the Communist Youth League, the Komsomol. He's a true believer, a party loyalist, building a career in the Soviet system. Then Gorbachev opens the door to private enterprise, just a crack. Khodorkovsky immediately pivots, uses his Komsomol connections, his network from the old system, to start a private cafe. Then an import business. Then by 1988, one of Russia's first private banks. When the Soviet Union collapsed entirely in 1991, Khodorkovsky was positioned perfectly. Through the chaotic privatization process, his bank acquired Yukos, a major oil company, for a fraction of its value. Within years, he was the richest man in Russia, communist youth official to billionaire oligarch. Not by clinging to communism, by recognizing the shift before others and ruthlessly repositioning. Now, Khodorkovsky's story ended badly. He eventually crossed Putin and spent a decade in prison. But that's a different lesson about knowing when to stop. The point here is how he built the fortune in the first place, by adapting faster than anyone around him. The adapter's advantage is psychological. Most people have identity tied up in their current role, their current skills, their current worldview. When the world changes, they resist. They defend the old ways. They wait too long. The adapter doesn't have that attachment. They're watching for the shift. And when it comes, they move first. For you today, this means something specific. Don't overinvest your identity in any single industry, any single skill set, any single political or economic arrangement. Build optionality. Develop skills that transfer across systems. Watch for emerging power structures and consider how you might align with them, even if it means abandoning what worked yesterday. The adapter's motto is simple: loyalty to reality, not to the past. The fourth archetype is the asset holder, and this one is both the most straightforward and the most ethically complicated. Here's the core insight. During chaos, real assets, land, resources, productive equipment, commodities, become available at prices that look insane in hindsight. The people who can acquire these assets through purchase or other means emerge from the chaos as the new wealthy class. Let me show you the pattern in its most dramatic form. Russia, 1992. The Soviet Union has just dissolved. The new government faces a problem. How do you transition from state ownership of everything to a market economy? Their solution was voucher privatization. Every Russian citizen received vouchers representing shares in state companies. In theory, this would distribute national wealth to the people. In practice, something very different happened. Most Russians were struggling. They needed cash for food, for heat, for survival, so they sold their vouchers. For bread money, for next to nothing. A small group of people, future oligarchs, understood what these vouchers actually represented. They bought them by the thousands. They accumulated ownership claims on Soviet industrial assets while everyone else was just trying to eat. Then came the loans for shares auctions. The government, desperate for cash, auctioned off major companies. Mikhail Khodorkovsky's bank acquired Yukos, an oil company now worth billions, for $168 million, a fraction of its value, essentially a gift. By the late 1990s, perhaps a dozen men controlled over half of Russia's economy, not because they invented anything, not because they produced anything, because they recognized that collapsing systems sell assets cheap, and they had the cash and the nerve to buy. Now this example has dark edges. Much of Russian privatization was corrupt, rigged auctions, political connections, questionable legality, but the underlying pattern is morally neutral and historically consistent. When systems collapse, assets become available. Those who acquire them build lasting wealth. Let me show you an older example with even more troubling dimensions, because understanding the full pattern requires honesty about how it plays out. Turkey, 1915 to 1923. The Ottoman Empire is collapsing. During this chaos, Armenian and Greek Christian minorities were expelled or killed. Their property, farms, homes, businesses, was seized and redistributed. Ordinary Muslim Turks who had been renters suddenly became owners. Shopkeepers took over prosperous businesses. Farmers claimed fertile land. Historians note that this mass confiscation was a key factor in creating Turkey's new middle class and business community. One striking detail: the residence that became Ataturk's presidential palace had originally belonged to an Armenian family before being seized. I'm not telling you this to make a political point. I'm telling you because it shows how the asset holder pattern operates throughout history, sometimes through purchase, sometimes through seizure, often in ethically gray or outright dark ways. The wealth transfer happens regardless of how we feel about it. The ancient version: when the Roman Empire collapsed, military veterans and local strongmen claimed abandoned estates for almost nothing. They became the feudal lords of medieval Europe, not through noble birth, through asset acquisition during chaos. For you today, the lesson is cleaner. Real assets hold value through transitions. Land, commodities, productive equipment, things that can't be printed or devalued. During the 2008 financial crisis, people who had cash bought foreclosed properties at 30, 40, 50% of their value. When markets recovered, they became wealthy landlords. The asset holder strategy is this: stay liquid enough to act when others are forced to sell. Don't over-leverage, don't overcommit. Keep some powder dry. Because when systems break, assets go on sale, and the people with the ability to buy at whatever scale they can afford emerge from the chaos with claims on real wealth. The fifth archetype is what I call the low-drama operator, and in some ways, this is the most accessible strategy for ordinary people. While others are chasing big plays, making dramatic pivots, or grabbing assets in the chaos, low-drama operators do something counterintuitive. They keep their heads down and focus on steady, local, value-driven work. They avoid political entanglements. They serve their community. They grow slowly while everyone else swings for the fences, and they often end up wealthier than the flashy operators, with far less risk. Remember the Albrecht brothers, the Aldi founders? Beyond being necessity providers, they exemplified low-drama operation in an era when German businessmen were navigating Nazi politics, then occupation, then Reconstruction. The Albrechts avoided all of it. They never met a German chancellor. They shunned publicity. They refused political alignment. They just sold groceries, cheaply, efficiently. While others rose and fell with political tides, the Albrechts expanded steadily, one store at a time, year after year. They became billionaires without ever making headlines. This isn't accidental. It's strategic invisibility. Consider the Marwari merchants of India. This trading community from Rajasthan built enormous wealth over centuries by following one principle: stay politically neutral and focus on business. Under British colonial rule, they didn't rebel and didn't collaborate visibly. They just traded. When independence came, they didn't take loud nationalist roles. They just traded. When political winds shifted, when governments changed, when policies reversed, the Marwaris adjusted quietly and kept doing business. By the mid-20th century, they dominated Indian commerce, not through dramatic moves, through steady accumulation across generations, insulated from political chaos by their deliberate low profile. The low-drama operator understands something crucial. In volatile times, visibility is risk. The person who makes enemies, who aligns with a faction, who becomes a symbol of anything, that person becomes a target when the wind shifts. The person who quietly provides value, who serves all sides, who makes themselves useful without making themselves prominent, that person survives and compounds. For you today, this might mean build a business that serves real needs without ideological positioning. Stay out of political fights that could alienate half your market. Focus on local relationships and community reputation. Don't tie your fortune to any single political outcome. Grow steadily. Avoid drama. Let the flashy players burn out while you compound. The low-drama operator's advantage is sustainability. They might not get rich fastest, but they stay rich longest. And they sleep better at night. 5 archetypes. 5 strategies that have worked across 500 years of empire collapse. Middlemen who bridge fragmenting systems. Necessity providers who deliver what people can't live without. Adapters who pivot faster than the people around them. Asset holders who acquire real value when others are forced to sell. Low-drama operators who grow steadily while avoiding political chaos. None of these require you to be born wealthy. None require special connections. They're strategies and mindsets available to anyone paying attention. And here's what makes this relevant right now. If you're watching the current situation of the debt levels, the institutional decay, the political polarization, the supply chain fragility, you're watching the conditions that have preceded every major system transition in history. Maybe it leads to collapse. Maybe it leads to transformation. Maybe it leads to something we can't predict. But whatever happens, the people who recognize these patterns, who position themselves in these roles, will do better than those who don't. The question isn't whether change is coming. The question is which archetype fits you. Maybe you're a natural bridge builder who can connect old and new systems. Maybe you're already providing something essential that people need. Maybe you have the psychological flexibility to adapt before others. Maybe you have the discipline to accumulate real assets slowly. Maybe you're the steady operator who can outlast the drama. Pick one. Study the historical examples. Start positioning now. Because the people who built fortunes during past transitions weren't psychic. They weren't lucky. They recognized patterns and positioned themselves accordingly. The pattern is repeating. The The question is whether you'll see it clearly or whether you'll be asking, like millions before you, how you missed it when it was right in front of you. If this gave you a new framework for thinking about opportunity during instability, subscribe, because we're going to break down specific modern applications of each archetype. Which industries are positioned for necessity providers today, where the middleman opportunities are emerging, how to think about asset acquisition in the current environment. The pattern is documented, the playbook exists. The only question is whether you'll use it. Thanks for watching.